All right, we'll be looking at elements of muralism here. And we're going to continue again that issue of appropriation. So again, normally we associate it with Anglo-Americans kind of appropriating different ethnic cultures, but here's another example where Chicanos take elements from other cultures and make it their own. And I don't mean appropriation in a negative way, more as, it's something that they appreciate, so they borrow from it. And one of the best examples that we see it is in literature. So I talked about it earlier with muralism and the concept of, muralism, some literature with the concept of magical realism. Here we see it in art. And so Mexican American artists in the 1960s are heavily influenced by Mexican artists. They're called Los Tres Grandes, that paint murals not only in Mexico but throughout the world at this time. And many of them are socialists or communists or some variation of those type of politics. So Chicanos naturally kind of gravitate to that that artistic representation. So Rivera, Diego Rivera, you might have heard of him, one of the most significant muralists in the 1930s. Chicanos kind of look up to him as a great artist, and along with the other two, Siqueiros and Orozco. And they're very political in their art. So Mexican Americans were essentially excluded from some of these major institutions, art schools. Many of them could not go to college and be professional artists. Obviously museums, because they're not producing art, they're not allowed to go into these spaces to display their artwork. So that's why, again, between 1900 and 1950, you really don't see anything that could be called Chicano art, whether it be literature, music, and so forth. It's not really until the 1960s and forward where you begin to see what people have called the Chicano Renaissance. And most of them produced it in their barrios. As I said earlier, Mexican Americans are not allowed into these institutions, so they have their community to display their talent. One kind of particular one kind of example of Chicano art is this place called Chicano Park, which is in San Diego. I won't play the song for you, but earlier I talked about one particular group, and they wrote a song about what happened in Chicano Park. And basically what happened was that the city was building freeways around a Mexican American community down in Logan Heights, if you know San Diego. And they put up all these pillars and stuff like that. And within this area, they were going to build a highway patrol office, like a police station. And Mexican Americans were like, we're tired of being abused this way. They build freeways in our communities. They don't build them in rich people's communities. They build them in poor communities. They're going to put a police station. So Chicanos took it upon themselves in the I want to say 60s, late 60s. I could be wrong though, but they took it upon themselves to take over this area where they were going to build this highway patrol station, and they got together and built a park. And within this park, it was supposed to be a gathering center for Mexican Americans, and you have all these highway pillars. So what they decided to do was paint them and kind of beautify their community and their taste. So you have some very kind of important Chicano artists who were still like in grad school at this time, in art school, come down, and then you have community artists too come up, go into this park and start drawing murals on these pillars. So instead of having a slab of gray cement, they had art that reflected their values and their culture. So that example really that example really addresses this Chicano artistic ability called rascuachismo. So here I give you a kind of like academic definition, but you might have heard this term. Sometimes our parents use it to describe something that they don't like. They go, "Oh, that's rascuache. That looks crappy," in other words. Well, Chicanos take this word, rascuache, and they use it in a positive way when it comes to art, because, as mentioned earlier, many Chicanos don't have access to artistic institutions or even the tools. So what do? Well, they grab a bucket of paint, and everybody in the neighborhood has probably some paint in their garage somewhere. And, they found a canvas, which are these walls right here. And they started drawing art, and that's what Rasquachismo is. It's not something kitschy, something, that they're trying to do just for kicks. It's this idea that, they don't have the resources, so they do with what they have. They use the resources that they do have and create art that way. And these murals and these walls, again, represent these canvases, are a reflection of that. So at the beginning, you don't have many professional artists, and many of them are just kind of addressing what is Chicano culture. They want to display what is Chicano culture for other people to see as they drive by their neighborhoods. And, you have a lot of kind of religious, as you see up here, motifs, a lot of indigenous motifs, a lot of political issues, right? It's Che Guevara. And just things that impact the barrio. You have, a lot of words that only we would know, right? Words that reflect the barrio culture, such as consafos. Maybe your grandma or grandpa has this tattooed on their, between their finger and their thumb. It has a C/S. That means consafos, which means with respect, right? So these are kind of common elements that you see in early Chicano murals. By the 70s, though, you begin to have a lot of Chicanos going to higher education. They become professional artists. Judith Baca is one of the most prominent Chicana artists of this period into the 80s. And there you have more kind of professional. But if you look at these murals, these are from the 60s. And, it looks like not anybody can do them, but, just people that want to draw some art. Got some paintbrushes and some paints, and there you go, right? So I'm going to quickly kind of show you some murals. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, just to show you some of these different motifs that are addressed here. Here you see one. A lot of Chicano murals kind of focus on challenging the perception that people should assimilate. And this is a great example, right? Here you see a guy being brainwashed, but here you see the indigenous figure coming down and teaching them his history. And over here, again, that assimilation idea happening there. This is just kind of reflects Chicano culture. You see Chicano Family. We're not all just a bunch of thugs, right? That's the way movies used to represent us during this time. We're like everybody else, play sports, work, take care of our community, things like that. And, we're no different from your average American family. This one you should all know because it tells us Chicano history. So murals do more than just, do pretty art. They actually teach, right? So we talked about this, the Mexican Revolution pushes people into the United States. Here you have the Mexican American generation with, Mexican Americans going into the military, the Zoot Suit phenomenon that happens. And then right here, the last couple of weeks, we've been spending on, looking at the Chicano movement, Tijerina, Cesar Chavez, Per Corona, Jorge Gonzalez. I don't know who she is, but she represents the Brown Berets. These are some other ones. This one's kind of interesting. This is actually Pinto art. Art that comes out of the prison system, and this actually takes a life on its own because it becomes a style of tattooing that's called Chicano tattoo. So if you ever see people with these type of tattoos, it's very much so associated with Chicano culture. So all these, again, this is part of what would have been maybe considered low culture, but as the years go by, they begin to transcend that classification, and it becomes part of high culture. Just some more murals. This one's interesting. I think the artist's brother died right here, so he drew a mural here. And then you see it kind of getting tagged up. This one's a mural dedicated to Dolores Huerta, who was up there with Cesar Chavez, probably just as important as Cesar Chavez, helped start the UFW. And then this is a great example, this particular one, of appropriation. Muralism was essentially dead since the 1930s. Nobody was doing that art anymore, except for by the 1960s, Chicanos pick it up again. Again, because it reflected their culture. Well, in 1984, Los Angeles hosted the Olympics, and they want to beautify the city. So what did they do? Well, they started taking these slabs of concrete, right, these freeways, and they asked different artists to come in and paint murals. Now, these aren't necessarily done by Chicano artists, but the point really is that this was a dead art. Chicano started painting all these murals around Los Angeles, and then the city of LA said, yeah, this is who we are now, right? We're this community that displays arts to everybody. And you know, as you're driving down the freeway, you would see this mural here. Placita Olvera, if those of you that know Los Angeles, is right here. That's Union Station right there. And then in the 1990s, people like Judith Baca took muralism to a new frontier, and these are murals in the digital cyberspace. So they take kind of playing with Photoshop and they create these murals, but again, still very political, addressing workers' rights in the hotel industry. And then other artists have just definitely pushed the boundaries of Chicano art. So whether you like him or you don't, we see how Chicano art begins to challenge our different perceptions of sexuality. This one's goddess, and you know, they take the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe, which is a very sacred image here, and they make it, you know, look like a woman's anatomy, right? So these become very controversial to the point that they even get death threats here on Alma Lopez and La Virgen. You know, La Virgen, again, very sacred image. She's represented as very, very passive, and Alma Lopez decided to portray her in a very active role, right? Some people were offended because, again, they felt like it sexualized this religious icon. So she did get some death threats, but in her mind, the artist's mind, she was saying, no, I want to make La Virgen into a positive character, somebody that women can look up to, not as a passive figure, but as an uplifting figure for women. So what do we learn? Number one, when it comes to Chicano culture, you know, part of it's the way they were portrayed by mainstream, you know, films and things like that, literature, and then how they represent themselves. And those ideas were often in conflict. And it's been a battle since the probably even further than the 1960s. But Chicanos finally got a voice in the 1960s to address the way they see themselves. And a lot of it had to do with cultural reaffirmation. So the 1900s to 1950s, it was about, can we assimilate, can we assimilate? And we kind of gave up on that because we knew we weren't going to be accepted. So we created something that reflects who we are. And then, I think one of the last points, well, Chicano culture, as I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, and the big thesis is that Chicano culture challenges the ideas of high, low, full culture, right? That rather we are like the concept of mestizaje, right? We are a little bit of everything. We are low. We are high culture. Some of these paintings, not some that are presented here because murals, you can't really move them, but some of these artists, you know, now are in museums, right? So we went from just having, you know, pictures on the wall to being fine art today, you know, people seeking them out. So we transcend that idea that there is such a thing as a difference between high, low, or even folk culture. And then lastly, as kind of pointed out with cultural reaffirmation, we begin to challenge this notion that there is one America, right? There's many Americas. And every group has their representation of what that America is based on historical experiences. And that's what Chicano art kind of does here, whether it be literature, music, or art, right? You might not agree with it. You might not like murals. You might not like low-writing culture. But that's more on you than on us because this art represents who we are. And, you know, it's important to our identity. All right, we'll stop it there. And I think I have like one more lecture to address after this.